Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. So I'm sorry if I sound a little sick. It's because I'm on the tail end of being a little sick. So bear with me, please. It is time for my September wrap up, and I want to tell you about everything that I read in September. So, the first book that I finished in September was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the second book in her Part of Your World series, and I listened to the audiobook. So, the summary of this is that our main female character is Dr. Brianna Ortiz. She has a younger brother who is in kidney failure and needing a kidney donor. She thinks that there's some stuff going on at work with like a promotion that's going not her way. She has a divorce in the works. She's just not going great. And then she kind of has the opposite of a meet cute with our main male character, Dr. Jacob something. And then he ends up writing her a letter to try to explain their not meet cute, and this proves to start up a friendship between the two of them and kind of like have, a rough start, but they develop this friendship, and she pretty quickly like realizes that she has like feelings for this guy. And then he, I think, is wanting ultimately it does say this in the blurb, so don't feel like this is a spoiler. Ultimately, Dr. Jacob ends up being a match for her brother and decides to donate a kidney to her brother. And he does not want this to be like a big deal, but Brianna is like, "What can I do for you?" And so she agrees to be his fake girlfriend. So there's an element of fake dating in this book. Jacob has a lot of anxiety, and this is something that the two of them discuss. And Brianna is like really like helpful and cognizant of for Jacob throughout the book. I really enjoyed this book while I was reading it, and I felt this way about the first book, The Part of Your World, that I read by Abby Jimenez. And here's the thing, a month later, and I can't really remember most of what happened in the book. And I felt this way about Part of Your World too, that while I was reading it, having a great time. Can't tell you anything really about it. I guess I just did tell you everything that I just said, but that's mostly because it's in the blurb. My memory of this is that I really appreciated how Brianna was helpful for Jacob, that she like handled his anxiety really well, and it like I really felt that these two characters were a good fit for each other, that I could see in what ways they would work out and what ways they each appreciated the other person and sort of complimented each other. I thought that was done really well. I love a good fake dating element, so that was fun. And I don't know, I felt like towards the end, the actual sort of conflict and uh one of the characters like kind of freaks out essentially about the other character and like the what's going on between them, and there is a third act breakup situation, and I felt like that was just like really overdone, but I felt like the other party like did a good job kind of helping the other person through it. So like I don't want to like spoil too much of it, but like yeah, I thought this was really good, and I understand why this was a nominee, won the Goodreads Choice Award nominee. A little unclear to me on Goodreads. I guess it won it. And yeah, I thought it was cute. Ultimately, I would recommend it, and I liked it. I just also am like having no real memory of it, and I liked I like the fact they were both doctors. I like that there was sort of this like traumatic past element that they had to work through, anxiety representation. I just feel like her books are really good, and then they don't stick with me for reasons I can't quite put my finger on. The second book that I finished in the month was called Salt Houses. The author is Hala Alyan, I think. I think this is a Palestinian American poet, novelist, and clinical psychologist. Okay, so Salt Houses is a multi-generational like family saga kind of book. It's not that long. It's just over 300 pages, but every chapter is following a different character in this family, and we are sort of jumping forward chronologically in time. And so it starts in like 1965ish and then goes through essentially contemporary time. And some of the characters, we get like repeat chapters from them, but we're kind of just following this family structure and following what's going on with these main characters. I would say to some extent, Aliyah is like one of the main characters. She is like we get her perspective multiple times, and then we get like her mother, her husband, her siblings, her children, that kind of thing. And it's all about how in each generation and each sort of iteration, like the families are, because of where they live in Kuwait and Beirut and Palestine, etc. Like there's constant upheaval and having to move and that kind of thing. So there's sort of this idea that like every parent is like, oh man, I had to raise my kids in this other location, not where I grew up, and like I never loved it here, but like I'm glad they love it here. And then those kids grow up to be parents, and then they have to like move and then raise their kids in a new place, and it's like sort of keeps happening. And so there's a little bit of identity discussion about what does it mean to have ancestry, and you know your parents came from this location, but like that's not where you grew up, and what does that mean for you? And especially as some of Aaliyah's children and like nieces and that, you know, like that next generation start going to America. And so there's a little bit of discussion, especially in like the 90s and early 2000s, post 9/11, that kind of thing, sort of a discussion about identity and relating to your own history and that kind of thing. So I enjoyed this. I felt like it was a little bit of a debut novel. I cannot further explain that. I think the writing was pretty good. I wanted a little bit more like plot. This is a strong literary fiction, character driven novel, and it's just sort of like these little vignettes. And because we're constantly jumping from character to character and forward in time, like sometimes it like the next update will be like 8 years later, and then like people have already like moved away and had kids, and like so it's like there's many more characters. And I just really wish that we kind of would have had a chance to sit a little bit longer with some of these characters and kind of understand a little bit more about what their experience is of this space. I feel like I just would have wanted like a little bit more time with each character. The blurb kind of talks about like you can't go home again, and I feel like that is the overall message, but like one that I think that I would have preferred like just a few, like maybe like only like 3 point of views, and kind of seeing how that idea is played out over time, maybe. But I did enjoy it. I read this for a book club, and we like really didn't have a ton of discussion about it, which is not really that surprising to me. But yeah, it's about like religion and displacement and like loss and war and family dynamics. So I thought it was kind of an interesting choice for a book club. The next book was also for a book club. This is for a very different book club that is generally a sequential art book club, comic club. And so we read The Cull, Volume 1, which is by Kelly Thompson, and the illustrator is Matea de Iluise. I totally butchered that. I'm so sorry. This is a story where there are like 5 main characters. They're, I think, maybe seniors in high school. They set off to go to this location near where they grew up, like on a beach, and then they kind of ultimately they like go through sort of like a portal into another world. I don't feel like that's like a huge spoiler. It happens relatively early. This is a relatively short book. It's a volume 1 bind up of issues 1 through 5. But yeah, I thought this was a interesting volume. It really packs a lot of information into this like one volume, and we see a little bit of dynamics with these 5 friends, and a little bit of sort of like what's going on, and there's a little bit of like a dystopian alien, possibly apocalyptic element towards the end, like a little bit of horror. But I don't know. It very clearly was the start of a series, and I wish I kind of said during our book club when we discussed this book that I sort of wish that like this much stuff was covered in this book, and I sort of wish this much was covered, but like in the same amount of pages, so we would have had a little bit more time with some of that. I understand where and why it ended where it did, but like I don't know. It's a very good introduction to a potentially really cool ongoing story. It just also like really packed a lot of stuff into these first 5 issues, and I felt like we really didn't get a chance to sit with our characters long enough to fully kind of see where they were coming from. But I am intrigued to see where this continues. And so it came out, looks like the first volume came out April of 2024. So maybe we'll get more soon, fingers crossed. The next book that I finished in September was Enthralled by Tiffany Roberts. This is the second book in the Spider's Mate series, and it kind of annoys me a little bit that the series is called The Spider's Mate, because like this is an alien romance series where this human ship has crashed onto this planet, and the local people are sort of very like spider like, but like there's a big emphasis from them who are like, we're not spiders. I mean, they are. They like can spin webs and they have multiple legs and like whatever. They're like basically like spider centaur, you know what I mean, like spider on bottom, person on top kind of situation. So this is the Enthralled is the second installment of the series, and so we are picking up with the same couple, as this whole trilogy is following the same 2 main characters, who are Ivy and Catan. Ivy is the human. She is woken up in book 1 by Catan, and in book 1 the 2 of them like start to learn each other's language. He protects her because she is small and fragile and doesn't know the ways of the jungle, and ultimately over the course of book 1 they fall in love. But then here in book 2 there is sort of like the rest of, like, it's not so simple as just like we fell in love, the end, because there's more stuff going on with Catan and his people, and like his queen, who is a major source of danger because the queen wants Catan for herself. So in this book, like he has to continue to protect Ivy and try to figure out how he's going to navigate figuring out what's going on with the queen and the colony and like that kind of thing, as he keeps Ivy secret. But then also he wants to take Ivy away for her safety, and she's like, yeah, but there's a few other humans that like we could also wake up. Like most of the ship crashed, burned, everyone's gone, but like where she was in this chamber are like a few other people, humans, who have been in cryosleep. And so ultimately like he agrees that she like that he agrees because he loves her, and so they end up waking up more humans. And then he's like, cool, well now I have a whole bunch more people that I have to like take care of and protect, and so how are we going to do that? So there is good tension throughout. There is still a deepening of a bond between our 2 main characters, and and there's an introduction of quite a number of new characters, which I thought was kind of interesting. I did feel like this, I mean, it is like a romance, but like it definitely is expanding more into sort of, I don't want to say like an adventure story, but like the bringing in of these other humans. And then like Catan has to like also like we hear more about like Catan's friends and that kind of thing. Like it definitely has widened the cast of characters a fair amount, and I think that was good and interesting. It just is like not a very typical element for like an alien romance, so I enjoyed that, and I was intrigued. And so then I went ahead and finished this trilogy because I read Bound, which is the 3rd book, and again this is by Tiffany Roberts. And so ultimately like the queen has become a huge problem, and is like, this is the 3rd act. This is where all this stuff is gonna like come to a head. And how is Catan and Ivy, how are they going to navigate the situation that they find themselves, and the all of the humans and Catan's friends and like the people that Catan most cares about. I really enjoyed that this book, all 3 of these books are dual point of view, and I really appreciate how much we get to see from Catan's point of view. And like, yes, he's super infatuated with and views Ivy as his like fated mate, and like he like her safety and like his love for her is his number 1 priority. But like I really enjoyed that he had so much going on, and that like there was all this other stuff going on in the book, and like a real like, especially by this third installment, like there's a real bringing in of who he is and his history and like what he wants, but also like of his culture and his peoples. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like a lot of alien romance books, like they just don't go this hard. But also like this is, I think that they took the time to do that in this trilogy. You have 3 books to follow this love story between these two, as well as how they're going to actually make that happen. Like there are stakes, and like those stakes need to be resolved, and ultimately they do. I felt like at the very end of this trilogy, there was some stuff brought up in like basically the second half of the 3rd book where I'm like, whoa, this took a left turn I was not expecting by like where they decide to go. I'm not gonna like say much more about that, but I had expected the final climactic like big event that needed to happen. I was like, yeah, that needed to happen. I figured that out halfway through book 1, right? And I was like, okay, cool. It just, I felt like it took like forever for that to actually finally happen. And then like where the cast of characters all kind of ultimately end up was pretty interesting. I did see that the authors intend to have other romances with like some of the humans and some of Catan's friends. So I would potentially read more of those, just because I feel like this was such an interesting world that I got to be a part of for 3 books, and I felt like the cast of characters actually were not just totally cardboard, and so I was intrigued. But I was glad to finish up that trilogy. Okay, well, I actually like read more. I read 10 books in September. I didn't realize it was that many. But the next book that I'm going to talk about is another book club book, which was The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa C. Technically, the Salt Houses was from August, but I like finished it in September because I'm such a good book club member. But yes, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa C. This was a book club book, and I listened to the audio version, and it was not really great. Like if this was not a book club book, I for sure would have DNF'd it, because it starts off with a lot. Okay, so how to describe? In this book, we are following our main character of Li Yan. She is a member of the Aka people in rural China. And her people and everyone who lives on this like mountain and like the nearby mountains all are like tea leaf picker kind of, like that's where they get their living. And the book opens and she is like steeped in these like ancient traditions of her people, right? And a lot of what is described felt to me like I actually had to like go and remind myself when this book was set, which like it opens with saying year A to B, and it was like year 1988 or something through 92. I don't know, whatever. And I had to remind myself multiple times this was like 1988, not 1888. And I understand that this is like super rural China, and like I've never been to rural China, so like okay, but it's rough. Okay, it's rough because the people of this village like have a lot of these beliefs and the things that our main character sees, and the superstitions and the like sort of atrocities that she witnesses in her early life were really rough, and it was pretty hard to read about because she just has like a pretty like bleak life. Like there is no real description of her being like, and I'm happy with my life. It's her being like, this is all the shit that's going down, and I'm like, yeah, that sucks. I mean, she doesn't like know any different. Like she like there's no electricity or cars in this village, you know, like she doesn't have any scope that it's different anywhere else, really. And ultimately, like, she does start to go to school. Like, she gets more schooling than most people, but like I don't even think she like I think she like barely finishes high school, essentially, is sort of the equivalent. She was supposed to potentially like finish high school and then go to college, but ultimately like the she ends up like getting pregnant, and that's in the blurb. I don't feel like that's much of a spoiler. And sort of we follow the rest of her, not the rest of her life, but the next number of years, because she ultimately has to like give the baby up. She decides to give the baby up because otherwise the baby would be killed. That is literally in the blurb. And it's a tough time, right? And so there are these little sort of, it sounded to me, because I was listening to it on audio, as if these were like mixed media elements that would have been included in the book to try to follow along with what happens to the baby. And like eventually, like, I'm going to go ahead and spoil this book for you, okay? It came out in 2017. Sorry, had like a coughing fit. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this book for you because I don't really recommend you read it. If you want to, great, but probably no one's going to watch this video, so I don't really care. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this. This book was not good. It was boring. It was bleak. It was not interesting. I didn't feel like it was evocative. Like, it didn't feel like I was in the main character's like head or her space. The parts that could potentially be interesting were just like skipped and like kind of being like, and so it was 2 years later. And I was like, oh, okay, guess nothing relevant, nothing sad happened in those 2 years. So we're not going to talk about it. And I thought, okay, like once she has this baby and then she has to give the baby up, and then we're following all these mixed media stuff to follow what's going on in the baby's life, who ends up getting adopted and raised in America. Like, I was like, okay, this book is clearly going to end with a reconciliation and them reconnecting, and she's going to figure out who her mother is, yada, yada. And that does happen. Literally the very last page. Literally the very last page. Like, we are from the mom, Leon's perspective, the whole book, and her life, like, she has like a really rough start, and then eventually she meets a guy who like is her like second husband, and he's like super rich and he super loves her, and then she gets married, and then she has everything she ever wants, and then her husband's not even relevant in the rest of the book. He's just there to be like, oh, you need money, here you go. And then like the very last chapter of the book is written from the girl's perspective, this baby who is now not a baby anymore. She's like 18 or 19 or 20 and in college, and there is a thread of tea throughout the whole book. Like, that is something that Leon and her family grew up around and something she knows all about. And then she goes off, she ultimately later like gets an opportunity to learn more. And then I don't know, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I don't want to get into it. It was long and boring and bleak and not interesting, and I didn't care about any of the characters. And we had this like there was this divide. There was just, I don't know, I can't even remember if it was written in third person. I think it must have been. But like, I did not give a shit about our characters, and there was big chunks of time that was skipped and stuff that was really boring, and I didn't like it. So there you go. And I think that if I had any interest whatsoever in tea and tea business, it might have been a little bit more interesting, and I don't, and it wasn't. So would not recommend. But moving right along, the next book that I finished was Ravensong by TJ Klune. This is the second book in the Green Creek series, and I cannot believe that it took me so long to get to this book, considering Wolfsong book 1 was one of my favorite books of like 2021. I don't know. I had tried to read Ravensong before and just kind of like wasn't getting into it. And I think, and I did not really like this one quite as much as I liked Wolfsong. I think it's because I just didn't really like Gordo quite as much as I liked Ox. Yeah. So yeah, this is, in the first book we follow Ox and then like the Bennett pack, and this first, I would say the first 35% of this book of Ravensong is a discussion of Gordo's childhood, and then also kind of like a rehashing, but from Gordo's perspective, of stuff that happens in book 1, which I thought was interesting and like relevant because he has a different perspective. And also there was a chunk of book 1 where Gordo was not in the book, and so we get to see a little bit of what he was doing when he wasn't in the book. But then the like main conflict, or the main like there's a thing that happens at like 45% or 50% of the way through the book, and like that's going to be like, okay, so this is now the problem, this is like the conflict of this book, like this is the thing that we have to like resolve and work on. And then I felt like Gordo didn't work on that. He's like, we're gonna fix this problem, guys, we're gonna fix it, because I won't allow the bad thing to happen. And I was like, okay. And then like Gordo like doesn't do it, like it's not that he doesn't do it, like I don't know, it drove me a little nuts. And I listened to the audiobook of this. The narrator overall does an okay job. This is the same narrator as book one, and I liked his voices for like Ox and stuff better than I liked this book, because for whatever reason this takes place in like Oregon or something, and most of the people in this book series, a lot of the people in this book series have grown up in this area. There's like one or two people who grew up sort of in the East Coast or in Maine or something. But like Gordo has this like Southern hick country boy accent, despite the fact that like Tanner, Chris, Ox, Rico, like all these people also grew up in Green Creek. None of them have this like country hick accent, which kind of annoyed me. Gordo holds this huge grudge against Mark, his like fated mate, from his past, and it felt absolutely unreasonable for him to have this huge grudge and to hold this grudge for like 25 years, right? And then ultimately like he just kind of like lets it go, and I'm like, why couldn't you have let that go 22 years ago? Like, have a grudge for a little while. I don't know, like I did get more into it towards the end. There was like a big reveal. I like, and like a lot of this is sort of like, hey, like you wouldn't understand because you're not part of the pack, or like because you're not a magic user. And I'm like, I'm not part of the pack, okay? I'm not a magic user. And so I don't really understand. And so like how Gordo used his magic to kind of resolve the problem that was happening with Mark and a couple other people, like, didn't really make any sense to me. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. So I don't know. I liked it. I got more into it as the book went on. I just don't love Gordo as a main character to the same level as I love Ox. So I am intrigued where it's going to go. At the very last page, there was like a reveal, and I was like, yeah, that's obvious. Like I could tell that from like very early on in the book. Not like who exactly the reveal was, but like what the reveal was not a surprise. And then I actually like I misread the last page. Like I let my eyes jump ahead. Have you seen that meme where it's like, and we have to plan the bank robbery, and the bank exploded because your eyes jump ahead? That's exactly what happened. And I thought I jumped to a conclusion about like who the reveal was about, and I was like, what? No! I like screamed from across the house, and then Ben came to check on me, and I was like, oh no! I just like my eyes skipped ahead and I misunderstood something. So I am intending to continue this series. It's just these are big chunky books, and this one was just not. It didn't land as well as Wolfsong for me. Okay, last couple. Let's get through these a little fast. Thrown in the Dark by A.K. Caggiano is the first book in the Villains and Virtues series, and I actually have a vlog that's coming out, so I'm going to go into a little bit more description of that. I've only read one of my 3 books for that vlog, so like it's gonna be a while until you see it, but let me give you the basics of this book. Thrown in the Dark. We have a world where there's sort of like there's evil and there's good, and they are very like delineated, and to some extent the evil is associated with sort of demons and hellfire, that kind of thing, and the good is somewhat associated with sort of angels and that kind of thing. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's sort of the summary of it. And our main male character is half human, half demon. His father is the like big bad evil demon guy, and his father has been imprisoned. So his goal throughout this whole book is to like go and rescue his demon lord father. His name is Damien. Damien is going to try to rescue his demon lord father. And he ends up meeting the main female character, who is Amma, A-M-M-A, Amma, who is like so like good and bubbly and like pink flouncy, you know, that kind of thing. And because of magic and stuff that happened, like the two of them have to travel together, and it's a road trip situation. I struggled a little bit with this book. I feel like there is a tonality and the like actual writing of it that is very like specific in a way that sometimes I thought was funny and sometimes annoyed the crap out of me. Because this has a sort of like Princess Bride element, or sort of like, I don't know what else I could compare it to. It's like I'm gonna be serious. Oh, it's like sort of like Monty Python-y a little bit, a little Princess Bride. Like it's very like, I'm serious. I'm a demon like spawn, blah blah blah. And then like, but then like when he talks to his imprisoned father, because like he can do that through magic, he the demon lord bad guy is like, well, hey there, kiddo. And it's just like every time that they encounter this like, I'm a snarling like bad guy, and then it's like, oh, but I actually just oh shucks. So it's like it felt weird in that like it felt sort of like there were two people who wrote this book, one of whom was like, let's make it YA and fun and cutesy. And the other person was like, no, let's make it dark. And like the two of them constantly were trying to like compromise, or like someone would come in and be like, actually, I'm going to edit some of this and like make it like more fun. And it just, so like the tone was kind of weird. There's like this whole like, there's like a cult of people who support the bad guys, and they were like running around like buffoons, and I was just kind of like, is this supposed to be funny? And sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. And so I don't know, it's definitely like road trip. There's definitely tension between our main two characters of a sexual nature that is brewing, and I thought it was fun and interesting, but like it's definitely the start of a book. It doesn't really have a great end point. It sort of has a little bit of a cliffhanger. You have to, it definitely is the first of installment. Like you definitely have to keep reading in the series. So, and I don't know if I didn't hate this, but I also didn't love it so much that I am desperate to continue the series. So check, like keep an eye out for the vlog if you're interested in more thoughts on Throne in the Dark. The last two books that I read in September, right? Last two, yeah, were not my favorites. Rescued by the Luxirian by Zoey Draven. I read this because it just came out in August of 2024, and it's an alien romance, and I love me a good alien romance, except for this one was super generic. It's super boring. We have a main female, it's also quite short. It's like a novella. We have a main female character of Lyra, who is a human woman who has lived this like very, and she wants to have a baby. Oh, there was just some notification on my phone, and I didn't see what it said. She wants to have a baby. She's been prepping to do these like fertility treatments or something, but right before, like immediately before she's going to be doing this, apparently she decides to take one last vacation before she gets pregnant and has a baby. And then she's on a cruise, like a in space cruise, and then her cruise ship like explodes. She gets in an emergency pod. She crash lands on this planet, and the only other person on this entire small, I assume small planet is Droxen, who's the main male character. He is Luxurian, and literally the second he sees her, he's like, oh, this is my fated mate. And so he is like, my instincts roar to life, I must protect her and feed her. And she's like, oh wow, I just like crashed, and like this guy is hot. And then like literally 24 or 48 hours later, he like they're like, oh, so like let's bang. And like I think you're like, and he says, oh hey, you're my fated mate. And she's like, I've heard about that, sounds cool to me. And like that's the whole book. Like it there you go, I just told you the whole book. So I don't know, I didn't really feel like either of the characters were well, like I don't know anything about these characters really, and like there wasn't really anything that invested me to them. I literally don't even know what Droxen like looks like, other than he has like shimmery skin and horns, I think. And so it's like, I don't know, they were both given one personality trait, and then the rest of it was just like, oh well, we have this like instinct and we want to bang, so they do. And then like the sex was like not even that good. Like it was like, it was sort of like there was a little bit of a scene, and then it was kind of like later as they lay sated, and I was like, oh cool, okay. So like we didn't even get like a ton of like explicit content, in my opinion. It was just, it was boring, it was straightforward, it was like a novella amount of development, and I basically have already forgotten it, and I finished it 3 days ago. The last book that I finished in September is Haven Point by Virginia Hume. This was chosen as a buddy read between me and one of my friends, not by me. And I was bored throughout the whole thing. This is a literary fiction kind of book where we're basically following two like the blurb makes it sound like there's 3 points of view or 3 timelines, and there's really not. There's really only like 2 points of view, 2 timelines. We're following Marin, who's the grandma, and then her granddaughter Sky, and the woman in the middle is Annie. Sky's mother is Annie. Annie is Marin's daughter. But we don't get to see Annie's perspective. We're really only seeing Sky's perspective and Marin's perspective. And it starts in like 1944 when Marin is like 20 years old and ends up meeting, she's a nurse in World War II. She meets a doctor. The two of them fall in love. They end up getting married and starting a family, yada, yada. And so we ultimately are following like Marin's timeline from 1944 and through like 1970. Though obviously she is also in Sky's timeline. And Sky was born in like, I don't know, the mid 80s or something like that. And so we're following a little bit of Sky's timeline where sort of her youth and also like into her adulthood and sort of what is going on, because like the blurb makes it sound like it's way more interesting, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you know early on. You know Annie is an alcoholic. You know that Annie is dead. You know that Annie's had a brother who died in like an accident, and then eventually throughout the course of the book, like some stuff is like revealed, but it's like, well, we already knew that fact. We just didn't know the circumstances around it, and it was just boring. It was just boring. And like the name Haven Point is a description of this location that is a like peninsula in Maine that is where like these waspish kind of families with money summer, and that's where the grandma lives and where Sky goes when her mother's doing like rehabs and stuff. So like, okay, I don't know. This explores what it means to belong to a place and to a family that holds tightly to its traditions and its secrets. And like, here's the thing, there's just not really any secrets. And if there are any secrets, it's like they're really wimpy, crappy secrets. like finally something interesting kind of happens at 50%. And then like Marin's like, well, okay, like we worked through it. Everything's cool. And I'm like, but that was like kind of interesting. I don't know. I was bored throughout the entire thing. Like the message at the end is sort of like, oh, hey, I know that you had a crappy childhood that you view this way because like your mother was an alcoholic and like this caused all this problems and trauma and whatever, and you probably should go to therapy about that. But also, like, your mom was an artist and like a good person, and like you should maybe view things like the other direction too. And Sky's like, yeah, maybe I should. And like, hey, I know that everybody who is from this like waspish, homogenous, white, wealthy community, like has been super judgmental about like people who aren't part of this community, and then in the end like the person who's not part of that community ends up being a drug dealer anyway. So like they were all right about that guy, and I was just like, okay, fine, that's fine. So yeah, I did not enjoy Haven Point, and it was long, and I just did not have a good time with that. There was a couple different books. I feel like all of my like book club books, I kind of, well, Salt Houses was good, but like the Lisa C book and this Haven Point book were like not fun for me. And everything else was kind of like, you know, mid, or, you know, mid to good, you know? So yeah, I've definitely, have kind of turned things around. I felt like August was a little bit of a lower month for me. And I everything that I read in September were all new to me books. And I feel like I am entering into October and November with sort of a fresh plans, I guess. So I don't know. I hope in October and November to work on a little bit of sort of like witchy vibes and paranormal stuff. I would love to maybe throw in a couple thrillers, but yeah, that was my September. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about September, and yeah, that is a wrap up of what I read in September. Let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments. Let me know if you have any suggestions for me going into the fall. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.